That night, something was off. I felt it the moment I walked through the front door. Amanda barely acknowledged me, her head buried in her phone as if I didn't exist. We'd been married for almost 12 years, and things hadn't always been perfect, but they'd never been this distant. I figured maybe it was just another one of her moods. Lately, there had been more of those: cold stares, short answers, her spending hours on her phone or at work. I didn't push it. Not yet. I worked a long shift at the shop that day, but exhaustion didn't seem to weigh me down like it usually did. Instead, I paced the living room, waiting for Amanda to come out of the bedroom. She had mentioned earlier that she was going out with her friends for a girls' night. At first, it didn't bother me. Hell, I wanted her to have fun. But tonight felt different. She was in the bedroom for an hour, getting dressed like it was a first date. Heels I hadn't seen in months. A tight black dress that hugged her body a little too perfectly. When she finally came out, I tried to play it cool. I leaned against the counter and said, "Going somewhere fancy?" She smiled but didn't meet my eyes. "Just dinner with the girls. Melissa's birthday." I nodded, even though I knew damn well Melissa's birthday was in June. It was November. I didn't say anything. It wasn't worth a fight. Maybe I didn't want to believe what my gut was telling me. She grabbed her keys and purse and kissed me on the cheek. It was a hollow gesture, one that felt more like a formality than affection. "Don't wait up," she said, flashing a quick smile. And then she was gone, leaving me standing in the quiet house. I waited for a few minutes, just long enough to convince myself I wasn't being crazy. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I walked over to the window and watched as her car pulled out of the driveway. The urge to follow her hit me like a freight train. I'd never been the jealous or paranoid type, but something in the way she carried herself tonight didn't sit right with me. Grabbing my jacket and keys, I headed out the door. I kept my distance as I followed her through town, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. At one point, I almost turned back. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I'd see her meet her friends and feel like an idiot. But I couldn't. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. She didn't go to any of the usual spots. No restaurants, no bars. Instead, Amanda drove straight to a hotel on the edge of town. My heart sank. I pulled into a spot far enough away to watch without being noticed. A part of me still clung to the hope that there was some logical explanation. Maybe the girls had rented a suite for the night. Maybe there was a surprise or some other reason to be here. But when she stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance, that hope shattered. He was waiting for her. A man, tall, blond, wearing a sharp suit, strode up to her like he owned the place. Amanda lit up when she saw him, her entire demeanor changing. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and they kissed. Not a friendly peck, but something passionate, intimate. My chest tightened, like all the air had been sucked out of the world. I felt paralyzed, stuck in that moment as I watched them laugh and talk like a couple in love. Everything around me blurred. I don't even remember pulling out my phone, but I must have because suddenly I was taking photos. I needed proof. Proof that this wasn't some nightmare. That this wasn't a figment of my imagination. Proof for the confrontation I knew was coming. They disappeared inside the hotel, leaving me alone with my thoughts. My mind raced, trying to piece everything together. All those late nights at work. The secretive phone calls. Her sudden interest in going to the gym. It was all connected. I had ignored the signs, told myself I was overthinking things. But now there was no denying it. Amanda was cheating on me. I sat there for what felt like hours, my eyes glued to the hotel entrance, as if I could will them to come back out. My thoughts spiraled. How long had this been going on? Who the hell was that guy? Did our entire marriage mean nothing to her? At some point, I realized I couldn't sit there forever. I had to act. But how? Should I confront her now, storm into the hotel like some deranged husband on a mission? No. That wouldn't get me anywhere. I needed a plan. I needed time to think. With a deep breath, I started the car and drove home. The house felt colder than ever when I walked inside. Amanda had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and nothing would ever be the same again. But one thing was clear: I wouldn't let this slide. Not without a fight. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. I had barely slept after getting home. Images of Amanda and that man in the hotel kept flashing through my mind. The texts were from Amanda. "Hey, I'll be home soon. Hope you slept well. Don't forget to grab groceries if you go out today. Love you. Love you." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I stared at the text, my jaw tightening. How could she casually throw those words around after what she did last night? It was like she was living in a completely different world, pretending that everything was normal. I got out of bed and made my way to the kitchen. My appetite was gone, replaced by a simmering rage I struggled to control. I opened the fridge, stared blankly at its contents, and slammed the door shut. Nothing seemed real anymore. The woman I had built my life with, trusted with everything, was a liar. And now, I had to act like I didn't know. When Amanda finally came home, I heard her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. I stayed at the kitchen counter, pretending to scroll through my phone as she walked in. "Morning," she said cheerfully, placing her bag on the table. "Sorry I was out late. Melissa's party ran long, and everyone wanted to stay after." She said it so effortlessly, like she hadn't just spent the night with another man. My stomach turned. I swallowed the urge to confront her right then and there. I wasn't ready yet. Not without a plan. "Yeah, no problem," I replied, keeping my voice casual. "Hope you had fun." Amanda smiled and walked over, wrapping her arms around my waist. She smelled of expensive perfume and something else, something unfamiliar. The scent of betrayal. She kissed me on the cheek, and I had to fight the urge to push her away. "It was nice to catch up with everyone," she continued, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "What did you do last night?" "Not much. Watched a few movies." She nodded, sipping her coffee without a care in the world. It was sickening how easily she lied. Part of me wanted to rip the mask off her face, to make her admit everything. But I knew that wouldn't get me the answers I needed. Not yet. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to everything Amanda did. I'd watch her out of the corner of my eye, noticing the subtle changes in her behavior. The constant texting, the late-night phone calls, the excuses to leave the house at odd hours. I had ignored these signs before, dismissing them as stress from work. Now I saw them for what they really were, clues to the life she was living behind my back. One evening, after Amanda had gone to run errands, I decided to dig deeper. I logged into our shared phone account, something I hadn't done in years. Sure enough, there were dozens of calls and texts to a number I didn't recognize. The frequency of the messages was staggering. I ran a quick search and found out who the number belonged to: Jason Whitmore. The name didn't ring a bell at first, but a deeper dive revealed he was a real estate executive who worked for a firm downtown. So that was him. The man she was sneaking around with. My mind raced with questions. How had they met? How long had this been going on? Was I just a backup plan, someone to keep the house in order while she played around with Jason? I wasn't going to get answers by sitting around. I needed to confront this head-on, but in a way that would give me leverage. I called a private investigator the next day, a guy named Frank Mason. He had a reputation for discretion and results. Within hours, we had a meeting set up at a small diner on the edge of town. Frank was an older man with sharp eyes that didn't miss much. He listened quietly as I explained the situation, jotting down notes in a small leather-bound notebook. "You've already got a good start," he said after I finished. "The phone records, the hotel visit. But we need more if you want this to hold up in court." Court? I hadn't even considered legal action at this point. Divorce, custody, property division, these things get messy fast when there's infidelity involved. You need evidence that's airtight. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and dread. This was becoming more real by the second. "Follow her," I said. Do whatever you need to do. I need the truth. Frank assured me he'd handle it, and promised to be in touch within a week. As I drove home, I tried to mentally prepare for what was coming. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall was inevitable. That night, Amanda climbed into bed beside me, acting like nothing was wrong. I stared at the ceiling, listening to her steady breathing as she drifted off to sleep. I wanted to shake her awake, to scream at her for tearing our life apart. But I didn't. Not yet. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The week dragged on, every second stretching into an eternity. Amanda carried on like everything was normal, completely unaware of the storm brewing under the surface. Every time she laughed, every time she casually kissed my cheek or asked how my day was, I wanted to scream at her. But I kept it together. Barely. Frank called 3 days later. Got some updates, he said, his tone clipped and professional. You're not gonna like it. I set the phone down on speaker, gripping the edge of the counter as he walked me through the evidence. Photos of Amanda meeting Jason Whitmore in various places, a fancy downtown restaurant, a park near his office, and of course, another hotel. He had timestamps, receipts, even videos. She's been seeing him for months, Frank said quietly. Probably longer. There's no doubt in my mind this is an ongoing affair. Months. That word hit me like a sledgehammer. While I was working extra hours to provide for us, Amanda had been out living a double life. And the worst part? She didn't seem to feel the slightest bit of guilt about it. You want me to keep digging? Frank asked. No, I replied after a long pause. You've done enough. I have what I need. All right. Let me know if you need anything else. And sorry, man. I know this isn't easy. I hung up without replying. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing with 100 different thoughts. I finally had the proof, but now came the hardest part, confronting her. And I couldn't do it without a plan. That night, I waited until Amanda was asleep before sneaking into the garage. I sat in my car with the windows rolled up, scrolling through the photos Frank had sent me. Each image was like a knife to the gut. Amanda, smiling and holding Jason's hand. Amanda, leaning in close to whisper something in his ear. Amanda, walking into a hotel room with him. I slammed my fist into the dashboard, the pain barely registering. How could she do this to me? To us? Was I just a placeholder in her life? Someone to pay the bills while she found excitement elsewhere? The next day, I couldn't focus at work. Every time a customer spoke to me, their words blurred into white noise. My boss pulled me aside at one point, asking if everything was all right. I gave him some excuse about not sleeping well, but I knew he wasn't convinced. How could I explain that my entire world was crumbling around me? When I got home, Amanda was already there, humming softly as she cooked dinner. She seemed happy. Carefree. The sight of her, acting like the perfect wife, made my blood boil. Hey, she greeted, flashing me a smile. How was work? Fine, I muttered, shrugging out of my jacket. She didn't seem to notice the tension in my voice. I made lasagna, she said, turning back to the stove. Your favorite. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was playing house, pretending to care, while sneaking around behind my back. I sat at the table, watching her with a mixture of anger and disbelief. How many times had she come home to me after spending the day with him? How many lies had she told to cover her tracks? Dinner passed in strained silence. I could tell Amanda was starting to sense something was wrong. She kept glancing at me, her brow furrowing slightly. You've been really quiet, she said after a while. Is everything okay? I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to lay the photos out on the table and demand answers. But I wasn't ready yet. Instead, I shook my head and forced a smile. Just tired, I lied. Work's been rough. Amanda hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, I get that. Maybe we should plan a weekend away soon. Just the two of us. A weekend away. The suggestion was laughable. Did she expect me to believe she cared about our relationship? Or was this just another cover story for one of her trips with Jason? I'll think about it, I said flatly, pushing my plate away. I couldn't stomach another bite. After dinner, I retreated to the garage again, needing space to breathe. I sat on the workbench, running a hand through my hair. I had to stay calm. Losing my temper wouldn't solve anything. I needed a plan, something that would give me the upper hand when the truth finally came out. I thought about the next steps carefully. Confrontation was inevitable, but I couldn't afford to let my emotions control the situation. Amanda was good at lying, at manipulating. If I wasn't careful, she'd twist the narrative to make herself the victim. Not this time. The following day, I met with a lawyer. He walked me through the legal side of things, how the evidence would help in a divorce case, how we could protect my assets. It was overwhelming, but I forced myself to focus. I wasn't going to let Amanda take everything from me. By the time I got home, I felt more prepared. The confrontation was coming. Soon. Amanda had no idea what was waiting for her. The following days felt like a slow march toward the inevitable. I had rehearsed the confrontation 100 times in my head. I pictured her face, the shock, the excuses, the lies she tried to spin. I was ready, or so I told myself. Amanda's behavior didn't change. She continued with her little routines, work, phone calls, late-night outings. Each time she left the house, I fought the urge to follow her. I didn't need to anymore. Frank had done his job. I had all the proof I could ever want, and then some. It was a Thursday night when everything came to a head. Amanda was in the bathroom, taking longer than usual. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, lighting up with a message. I didn't mean to look, at least that's what I told myself. But my eyes locked onto the preview. Jason, can't wait to see you tomorrow. Counting down the hours, babe. I stared at the phone, my jaw tightening. Tomorrow? What was she planning? She hadn't mentioned anything about going out. Did she think I wouldn't notice if she suddenly vanished for a day? The bathroom door opened, and Amanda walked out in a bathrobe, drying her hair with a towel. She saw me sitting there and smiled, but it faltered slightly when she noticed the look on my face. Everything okay? She asked, lowering the towel. I didn't respond right away. My mind was racing, the weight of the message still pressing down on me. I could end it right here. Show her the phone, demand answers. But no, this wasn't the time. Not yet. Yeah, I finally said, forcing my voice to sound neutral. Just tired. Amanda tilted her head, studying me for a moment. You've been saying that a lot lately. Are you sure you're okay? Maybe you should take a few days off work. Her concern would have felt genuine if I didn't know better. The audacity of it all made my blood boil. She was worried about me being tired. Meanwhile, she was sneaking off to hotels with another man, planning God knows what for tomorrow. I'll be fine, I muttered, standing up. I think I'll head to bed early. All right, she said softly, stepping closer to kiss me on the cheek. Her lips were warm, familiar, but they felt like poison now. I pulled away quickly and headed upstairs, leaving her standing there. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was a tangled mess of anger, pain, and paranoia. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long this had been going on. Was it something I had done? Had I driven her away? I hated myself for even thinking that. No. She had made her choices. This wasn't my fault. By the time the sun rose, I had made up my mind. Tonight would be the night. No more pretending. No more lies. When Amanda left for work that morning, I made a few calls. First to my lawyer, then to Frank. I wanted them on standby. If things went sideways, I needed to be ready. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, waiting for the hours to crawl by. Amanda came home around 6. She was dressed to kill, tight jeans, a low-cut blouse, and heels that added a few extra inches to her height. My stomach churned at the sight of her. She was going to see him. That much was obvious. Hey, she said casually, dropping her purse by the door. I'm heading out for a bit. Meeting some friends for drinks. Friends? I echoed, my voice colder than I intended. She didn't notice. Yeah, I won't be too late, she said, already slipping into her shoes. You good for dinner? Sure. Have fun, I said through gritted teeth. She flashed me a quick smile and walked out the door. I stood there, fists clenched, waiting until I heard her car pull away. Then I grabbed my jacket and keys. It was time. I followed her from a safe distance, just like I had the first time. This time, I wasn't nervous or unsure. I was focused. Determined. Amanda drove across town, weaving through traffic with a practiced ease that only someone with a regular destination would have. When she pulled into the parking lot of another hotel, I felt that familiar wave of rage. But I kept my cool. I parked a few spots away and watched as she stepped out of the car, phone in hand. Moments later, Jason appeared. He walked up to her with a grin, pulling her into a tight embrace. They kissed, longer than last time, and my stomach twisted in disgust. I took out my phone and began recording. They didn't even try to hide it. Like they knew they wouldn't be caught. Like I didn't exist. Not for long, I thought bitterly. They disappeared inside, and I sat there, gripping the steering wheel. My hands shook, but not from fear. From anger. I had everything I needed. Tonight, Amanda's web of lies was going to unravel. I would make damn sure of it. The final confrontation was near. The drive home felt longer than it should have, every second stretching as my mind raced. I had the evidence. I had seen it with my own eyes, Amanda with Jason. The lies, the betrayal, it all came crashing down at once. Tonight was the night everything changed. No more silence. No more pretending. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. Amanda wasn't back yet. I wasn't surprised. She was probably still with him, wrapped in his arms, laughing at whatever bullshit excuse she had fed me earlier. The thought made my stomach turn, and I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I needed a plan. Anger clouded my mind, but I couldn't afford to lose control. This wasn't just about confronting Amanda. It was about taking my life back. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I went inside, turning on only a few lights. I didn't want it to look suspicious. Let her walk into what she thought was just another normal evening. I sat in the living room, phone in hand, scrolling through the evidence Frank had sent me. Photos, timestamps, videos. Everything was there in excruciating detail. I knew this confrontation wouldn't go smoothly. Amanda would try to deny it, twist the story, make herself the victim. But this time, I had the upper hand. Time dragged on as I waited. Each passing minute made the knot in my chest tighten. Around midnight, I heard the sound of tires on the gravel outside. My heart started pounding. This was it. The front door opened, and Amanda walked in. Her heels clicked softly on the hardwood floor. She didn't see me at first, too busy scrolling through her phone. She looked happy, too happy. Like someone who had just spent a perfect night with the man she really wanted. Hey! She called out casually, not looking up. You still awake? I didn't answer right away. I stared at her, taking in the sight of the woman who had once meant everything to me. Now, she was a stranger. A liar. A cheat. Yeah, I finally said, my voice low and steady. She glanced up, startled by my tone. Oh. You scared me. She chuckled nervously and set her purse on the counter. I told you not to wait up. I couldn't sleep, I replied, standing from the couch. Thought we should talk. Amanda's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the shift in the air. Talk? About what? About where you've been tonight. I took a step closer, watching her reaction carefully. Her smile faltered, and for a moment, I saw panic flash across her face. She quickly masked it, crossing her arms in a defensive posture. I told you. I was out with friends. Friends? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Which friends? Melissa? Sarah? Yeah, she said, forcing a smile. Melissa's been having a tough time at work, so we. Stop. I cut her off, my tone sharper now. Don't. Just don't. Amanda blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift. What's going on with you? She asked, her voice edging toward annoyance. Why are you acting like this? I pulled out my phone and opened the video of her and Jason in the hotel parking lot. I walked over and held the screen up to her face. Explain this, I said quietly. Her eyes widened in shock as the video played. For a moment she said nothing, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to form words. The color drained from her face. Where did you get that? She finally whispered. Does it matter? I shot back. I've known for weeks, Amanda. Weeks. You've been lying to my face, sneaking around with him. All while pretending like everything was fine. She stepped back, shaking her head. It's not what it looks like. Don't insult me. I snarled, my anger finally boiling over. I've got photos, texts, videos. Everything. So don't stand there and try to gaslight me. Amanda's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel any sympathy. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice trembling. It just happened. I was lonely, and you were always working. Don't you dare blame me for this. I interrupted. You made this choice. You destroyed us. Tears streamed down her face now, but I didn't care. She was desperate, scrambling for excuses. We can fix this, she pleaded. Please, we can go to counseling, talk to someone. I still love you. Love? I laughed bitterly. You don't even know what that means. I turned away, shaking my head in disbelief. Pack your things, I said coldly. I want you out by tomorrow. Wait, no, please, she cried, grabbing my arm. You can't just throw everything away. I'm not the one who threw it away, I said, pulling free from her grip. You did. I walked upstairs without another word, leaving Amanda sobbing in the living room. As I shut the bedroom door behind me, a strange sense of calm washed over me. It was over. The lies, the betrayal, it was all out in the open now. Tomorrow, I'd begin rebuilding. Without her. The next morning, I woke to an eerie silence. No clinking dishes, no soft footsteps. For a moment, I thought it was all a dream, that Amanda hadn't come home crying and begging the night before. But then I saw the empty side of the bed and remembered everything with painful clarity. I sat up and rubbed my face, the weight of last night settling on my shoulders. Today was going to be hard, but I'd made my decision. Amanda had to go. There was no coming back from what she'd done. When I went downstairs, Amanda was sitting at the dining table. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her face was pale and drawn. She'd clearly been crying all night. I couldn't bring myself to care. She looked up when I entered, her expression a mix of exhaustion and hope. Morning, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Morning, I replied flatly. I walked to the coffee maker and poured myself a cup. The tension in the room was suffocating. Can we talk? She asked, breaking the silence. I didn't look at her. What's there to talk about? Please, Henry. The way she said my name made me pause, but I quickly hardened my resolve. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But we've been through so much together. We can't just throw it all away. I turned around, leaning against the counter. We didn't throw it all away, Amanda. You did. She flinched, and for a brief moment, I almost felt bad. Almost. I was lonely, she said, her voice trembling. You were always working. We stopped talking, stopped connecting. I didn't know how to tell you. I made a mistake, but it didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? I repeated, my voice rising. You've been seeing him for months. Don't stand there and tell me it didn't mean anything. I didn't love him, she insisted, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know. I felt trapped. Like we were stuck in a routine, and I needed to feel alive again. I shook my head in disbelief. So you went and had an affair instead of talking to me? Instead of trying to fix things? Do you know how that makes me feel? Like I was never enough for you. That's not true, she sobbed. You've always been enough. I was selfish. I made a horrible mistake. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to find even a shred of the woman I once loved. But all I saw was someone who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. It's too late, I said finally. We're done. I want you to pack your things and leave. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, panic creeping into her voice. That's not my problem, I replied coldly. You made your choices. Now you have to deal with the consequences. Amanda stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Henry, please. Think about what you're saying. We have a life together. You can't just throw me out like this. I can and I will, I said, setting my coffee cup down with a thud. I've already contacted a lawyer. This marriage is over. Her face crumpled as the reality of the situation hit her. She stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the table for support. You've already... Oh my God! You were planning this? Yeah, I admitted. I've known about the affair for weeks. I gave you every chance to come clean, but you didn't. So now we're done. Amanda sobbed uncontrollably, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. I'd spent enough nights agonizing over this. Now it was her turn to face the pain. I'll be back later, I said, grabbing my keys. When I get home, I expect you to be gone. She didn't say anything as I walked out the door. The sound of her crying echoed behind me, but I forced myself to keep moving. I couldn't let myself break down. Not now. I drove aimlessly for a while, the events of the past few days playing on a loop in my mind. Betrayal. Lies. The confrontation. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's nightmare. But this was my life now. Amanda was no longer a part of it. Eventually, I found myself at the lake. It was quiet this time of year, the water still and glassy under the pale morning light. I parked near the edge and got out, walking to the shore. The cool breeze felt like a slap to the face, jolting me back to reality. I stood there for what felt like hours, letting the silence wash over me. It was peaceful, something I hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time since discovering Amanda's betrayal, I didn't feel angry or hurt. Just numb. I knew this wasn't the end of the pain. There would be court dates, paperwork, endless questions from friends and family. But I would get through it. One step at a time. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. This was my life now. A life without Amanda. And somehow, I was going to survive it. By the time I got back home, the house was eerily quiet. I half expected to walk in and see Amanda still there, crying and pleading for another chance. But when I opened the door, I was met with emptiness. Her things were gone, at least most of them. The framed photo of us on our wedding day was missing from the mantel, and the closet in our bedroom had a gaping hole where her clothes used to be. I stood there for a while, just taking it all in. It should have felt like relief. She was gone, and I'd finally reclaimed my space. But instead, there was an ache, a hollow feeling that I couldn't quite shake. The reality of it all hit me hard. I wasn't just grieving Amanda. I was grieving the life we'd built together, the dreams we had shared. Our marriage might have been rotting beneath the surface, but for years I had clung to the idea that we were solid, unbreakable. Now that illusion was shattered, and I had to figure out how to move forward. Later that evening, I sat on the couch with a beer in hand, scrolling aimlessly through my phone. Messages from friends had started coming in. Somehow, word had already spread. Liam, hey man, I heard what happened. Call me if you want to talk. Ryan, sorry to hear about you and Amanda. If you need a place to crash, you know you're always welcome. I ignored the messages for now. I wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet. I needed time to process things on my own. I flipped through a few more photos on my phone, lingering on one from last summer. Amanda and I were at a friend's barbecue, smiling with beers in hand. At the time, I thought we were happy. Now, looking at it again, I noticed the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Had she already been seeing Jason by then? Was that the moment she had started pulling away? The questions spiraled until I couldn't take it anymore. I tossed the phone onto the coffee table and leaned back, rubbing my temples. I had to stop torturing myself with what-ifs. It didn't matter anymore. Amanda had made her choices. Now it was time for me to make mine. Over the next few days, I threw myself into work. The shop kept me busy, and that was exactly what I needed. Fixing cars was simple. Broken parts could be replaced, problems could be solved. If only life worked the same way. My coworkers noticed the change in me, though no one dared to ask questions outright. I appreciated that. They gave me space, and in return, I focused on getting the job done. It wasn't until Friday afternoon that someone finally broke the silence. "Hey, Henry!" Jack, one of the younger mechanics, called out as I finished tightening a bolt. "We're all hitting up Pete's tonight. You should come. First round's on me." I hesitated, wiping my hands on a rag. Going out wasn't exactly at the top of my list right now, but maybe I needed it. A distraction? Something to remind me that life hadn't completely gone to hell. "Yeah," I said after a moment. "Why not?" Pete's bar was packed when I arrived. The familiar scent of beer and fried food hit me as I walked in, and for a brief moment, I felt like a weight had lifted from my chest. This place had always been a refuge, somewhere to unwind after a long week. Jack waved me over to a table near the back, where a few of the other guys from work were already seated. "About time you showed up," he teased, sliding a beer my way. "We thought you were gonna chicken out." I chuckled softly and took a seat. "Nah, just needed to finish up at the shop." We fell into easy conversation, talking about work, sports, and the usual nonsense. For the first time in weeks, I felt normal, like maybe there was still some part of me that wasn't broken beyond repair. At some point during the night, I noticed someone watching me from across the bar. A woman with dark hair and a kind smile. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place her. She gave me a small wave, and I hesitated before nodding in return. "Who's that?" Jack asked, following my gaze. "No idea," I muttered, taking another sip of my beer. I didn't want to think too much about it. The last thing I needed was to get tangled up with someone new. I wasn't ready for that, probably wouldn't be for a long time. But the woman didn't approach, and neither did I. Eventually, I forgot about her as the night wore on. When I got home that night, the house didn't feel as empty as it had before. Maybe it was the alcohol dulling the edges of my pain, or maybe it was the realization that I was still standing. I had survived the worst of it. Amanda was gone, and life would go on. I stood in the quiet living room, looking around at the remnants of our life together. Slowly, I began gathering the things that reminded me of her, the photos, the gifts, the little mementos we'd collected over the years. I packed them into a box and shoved it into the back of the closet. Out of sight. Out of mind. This was my house now. My life. And I was going to rebuild it on my own terms. Life slowly began to take shape again in the weeks that followed. It wasn't easy, and some days felt like walking through quicksand. Amanda had moved out permanently, though there were still loose ends to tie up, legal proceedings, splitting assets, and dealing with the emotional fallout. We exchanged a few cold, formal texts about the logistics, but nothing beyond that. I didn't want to hear her voice. Work kept me grounded. Each morning I got up, went to the shop, and lost myself in the rhythm of engines and repairs. The repetitive work gave me a sense of control in a life that had spun wildly out of balance. But something else had shifted inside me, a darker, more calculating part that I didn't even recognize at first. I wasn't content to simply let things end quietly. I wanted accountability. I wanted Jason to face consequences too. It started with a simple idea: find out what he had to lose. Frank had been more than capable when it came to tailing Amanda. Now, I asked him to gather information on Jason, who he was, what skeletons might be hiding in his closet. At first, Frank hesitated. "You sure you want to go down this road?" he asked. "Sometimes revenge isn't worth it." "It's not revenge," I lied. "I just want the full picture." Frank sighed but agreed to take the job. A few days later, he sent me a report that made my blood boil. Jason wasn't just some random real estate executive. He was married, with 2 kids. His wife, Heather, worked in marketing, and according to Frank's notes, she had no clue about the affair. So Jason was playing the same game Amanda had played, living a double life, lying to the people who trusted him most. The thought of his family made me sick. Did his wife deserve to find out the way I had? Could I really blow up another household just to even the score? The answer came to me in the middle of a sleepless night. I didn't have to ruin Jason's life outright. I just had to make sure the truth couldn't be hidden anymore. I spent the next few days planning everything carefully. I wasn't going to confront Jason directly. That would give him a chance to spin the narrative. Instead, I mailed the evidence to Heather anonymously. Every photo, text message, and hotel receipt went into a neat little package with no return address. I left a note inside: "You deserve to know the truth." It was cruel in a way, but I couldn't feel guilty. I wasn't the one who had put her in this position, Jason had. If anyone deserved to deal with the consequences, it was him. The fallout came faster than I expected. 2 days later, I got a text from Amanda: "We need to talk. Call me." I ignored it at first, but the messages kept coming. "Please, Henry. It's important. Jason's wife found out everything. He's blaming me. You did this, didn't you?" The last message made me smirk. Of course she knew. I was the only person with a motive and access to the evidence. But I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of a response. I turned off my phone and focused on work. Let them deal with their mess. Later that evening, I was at the grocery store when I ran into someone unexpected: Heather. I recognized her from the photos Frank had shown me. She was standing in the produce aisle, looking lost in thought. When our eyes met, there was a flicker of recognition in hers too. She didn't know who I was exactly, but she could tell I knew something. "Hi," she said cautiously, stepping closer. "Do I know you?" "No," I replied, shaking my head. "But I know your husband." Her face hardened instantly. She glanced around, as if expecting Jason to appear out of nowhere. "Oh," she said flatly. "I take it you're connected to all of this." "Something like that," I said. "Look, I didn't plan to run into you. I'm not here to cause trouble." Heather sighed, crossing her arms. "You're the one who sent the package, aren't you?" I hesitated but eventually nodded. "Yeah. I figured you had a right to know." For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, to my surprise, she laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "A right to know? God, I've been living with that bastard for over a decade, and I didn't even see it coming." "Trust me," I said quietly. "I know how that feels." Heather studied me, her expression softening slightly. "Amanda, right? You're her husband." "Soon-to-be ex," I corrected. "Same here," she muttered. "I filed for divorce yesterday. Jason's been losing his mind over it." I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded. We stood there for a while, 2 strangers bound by betrayal. It wasn't exactly comforting, but it was something. "Well," she said finally, "thanks, I guess. For ripping off the Band-Aid." "Yeah," I replied. "Take care of yourself." "You too." She walked away, leaving me standing in the middle of the produce aisle. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of closure. The truth was out. The damage had been done. Now, all that was left was to rebuild. The weeks following my encounter with Heather felt different. Lighter in a way. The anger I'd been carrying around started to fade. There were still tough days, moments when I'd catch myself thinking about Amanda and the life we'd built, wondering where it had all gone wrong. But the bitterness no longer consumed me. I had faced the truth, delivered justice in my own way, and now it was time to move on. Amanda tried reaching out a few more times. Each message followed the same pattern, first anger, then guilt, then desperate apologies. She blamed me for Jason's life falling apart. Apparently, he had been demoted at work, his reputation in shambles after word of the affair spread through the company. Amanda wasn't faring much better. Her so-called friends had turned on her once the truth came out. I didn't respond to any of her messages. What was the point? We were done. Let her deal with the fallout she created. My focus was on building a new future, one without lies and betrayal hanging over my head. One Friday evening, Jack convinced me to go out again. We ended up at Pete's, the same bar we'd hit a few weeks ago. It was more crowded this time, the air filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. I wasn't in the mood for small talk, but I didn't want to spend another night staring at my ceiling, either. I grabbed a beer and found a spot at the bar, zoning out as conversations buzzed around me. It wasn't until I heard a familiar voice that I snapped back to reality. "Didn't think I'd see you here again," the woman with the kind smile said. The one I had noticed across the bar last time. She leaned against the counter, giving me a curious look. I blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, hey," I stammered. "Yeah, I've been laying low." "Rough couple of months?" she asked gently. "You could say that." I took a sip of my beer, debating how much to reveal. She didn't push for details, which I appreciated. Instead, she introduced herself. "I'm Emily," she said, extending a hand. "Henry," I replied, shaking it. Her grip was firm, confident. We fell into an easy conversation after that. It turned out Emily was a nurse at the local hospital. She'd gone through her own tough breakup last year and knew what it was like to feel stuck in limbo. We talked about everything and nothing: work, hobbies, favorite places to eat. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. The hours slipped by, and before I knew it, the bar was starting to thin out. I hadn't laughed this much in months. When Emily got up to leave, she smiled softly. "It was nice talking to you, Henry. Maybe I'll see you around." "Yeah," I said, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected. "I'd like that." She waved and walked out, leaving me with a strange sense of hope. I wasn't ready to jump into anything new, but the idea of meeting someone who understood what I'd been through, it didn't seem so impossible anymore. The next morning, I tackled the final step in my journey toward closure. I grabbed the box of Amanda's things from the closet and drove out to a donation center. Most of it was sentimental junk I didn't need: photos, old keepsakes, clothes she'd left behind. I dropped the box off without a second glance. It felt good to let go of the weight that had been dragging me down. With that done, I went for a drive, ending up at the same lake where I had gone after the confrontation. The water was calm, reflecting the pale blue sky. I stood at the edge, hands in my pockets, and let the quiet settle around me. This was my life now. A blank slate. No more lies, no more wondering. It was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in years, I was in control. As I stared out at the horizon, I thought about what I'd learned from all of this. Love, trust, loyalty, they weren't guarantees. People change, and sometimes they betray you in ways you never see coming. But I also learned that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. I survived the worst betrayal of my life, and I came out the other side. If I could offer advice to anyone in a similar situation, it would be this: know your worth. Don't let someone else's lies define you. It's going to hurt like hell, but you'll get through it. You'll rebuild, one piece at a time. I took a deep breath, letting the cool breeze wash over me. The pain would linger for a while, maybe longer than I wanted, but it wouldn't control me anymore. I had survived. Now it was time to start living again. With that thought in mind, I turned back to my truck and climbed inside. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready. Ready to move on. Ready to heal. Ready to begin again.